So just a few things about CVC. We were founded in 2006, and we help to foster entrepreneurship between Columbia alum, students, staff. We host events, and we try to create a vibrant and supportive community.
Very good.
So our programming includes programming includes events and an online listserv, as well as global programs. A big event that's coming up is an annual demo night hosted by CVC. To get involved in CVC, you can attend events through Meetup or Eventbrite like this one, participate in the listserv, join a global program, or apply for a board position. If you're interested in joining our network, we ask you to visit our website, which is listed here below, columbiaventurecommunity.com. And if you're interested in volunteering with us, here's the link to that as well. Just type that into your browser and it'll pop up. So now let me introduce our speaker, Michael, and our moderator, Rupe. Michael is CEO and partner at Y Combinator. Since becoming a partner in 2013, he's advised hundreds of startups and has actively promoted diversity efforts among founders. Rupe is an investor and a 3-time founder. He also at CVC is on the global board and is in charge of VC LP relations. Thank you both for your time, and I'll hand it over. Great.
Thank you, Grace. I appreciate that. And for Michael as well, and for the whole audience, Rope is a Finnish name. You shouldn't know how to pronounce that. The spelling doesn't help either. And the accent, yeah, that really doesn't. And then the accent as well, that's Finnish as well. I even did I thought it was hurting my business perhaps, so I was doing even practice to get rid of it. But my wife insists that I keep it, so I have to keep it. You have to tolerate it. So there you go. And Michael, it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
We've been exchanging emails, but it's great to see you here. Almost live. I guess this is the as live as we can get nowadays. So I like to have you here. Is there well, I'm gonna actually bring something up. I saw on Wikipedia actually that you were born and raised in New York. And it mentioned something that New York is your favorite city as well, which I liked. Now we can put a source there if you can confirm that. And then you went to Yale as well. And the first question I wanted to ask you is that why did you move to the West Coast?
Well, there's 2 reasons. One, my best friend was starting a company, and he convinced me to join. So at the time, that was the core reason. That company was Justin TV. The friend was named Justin Kahn, and it later became Twitch. But in general, kind of looking back, it's where startups happen. I think there's just a lot of stuff about, I don't know, there's a lot of people who are kind of fighting it back on the kind of idea that certain cities are better at doing things than other cities. And, with COVID, it's a huge test, but certainly at that time, 2006, it was the only place where startups were really happening in America.
That makes perfect sense. I also saw that you managed the finances for 2006 U.S. Senate campaign, and I believe you founded your first tech startup soon after that. And I think that was with Justin. Is Justin that got you into startups, or was that something that was brewing already?
No, Justin got me into startups. Okay. I thought I wanted to do politics, and that's why I worked at a campaign. And going in, I thought politics was about policy, and leaving, I realized it was about fundraising. And that began the process of me falling out of love with it, which continued to this day.
Yeah, a little bit jaded there, and I guess we have to thank Justin. I want to personally thank Justin as well, but I guess you want to thank him as well that he saved you there.
He did.
Okay. And with Justin, and with Justin TV, you took part in Y Combinator as well. How was your first experience with YC? How was that?
YC was very different then. think to set the context, almost no one that I knew was doing a startup at all. Startups were not cool. This was still in the aftermath of the 2001 crash. And so, I mean, the level of startup craziness today is so massive. Like, imagine the startup community was like 100th the size, or even smaller. And so first, YC was just the first group of people I ever encountered who were all doing startups.
Nice.
I would say the second thing about YC was that it wasn't well-resourced or impressive in any way. Investors didn't care. We were in the third batch of YC, so it wasn't like there were companies that ever done anything. Yeah, so really what it was back then was just an excuse to work full-time on your startup and funding. You have to remember, we were very young. We were, Kyle was 21, Emmett and Justin were 22, and I was 23. And we were coming out of the East Coast, and basically YC was the only one who'd give us money. It's that simple. It's weird because YC is so many other things now, but I think in a strange way, there's a lot of more money available now for early stage startups. It's a lot more popular to fund young people now than it was back then. And, you know, for us, it was just, it was the thing that gave us a group of other young people and money.
That's interesting. Well, considering that you were, I guess, young and you had other aspirations as well, and you were coming from the East Coast, that was still behind West Coast, to be honest. And so was there something that you wish you had known even before you did YC? Is there something that
No,
that really got you?
I tend to reject all questions on what I would do differently, because like I got very lucky. Like at the time I was 31, I'd made more money than I'll be able to spend. And my family and everyone is all set. Like my parents are retired and the whole thing. So God forbid I change any little detail that would have fucked that up. You know, we have this saying at YC when we're reading applications, it's like, don't be too smart. Like, you know, like being too smart can fuck you real bad. So we don't want to change anything. Also kind of as a young founder, and this is something I think is not well talked about, my naivete was an advantage. Especially back then. I think there's actually an interesting thing happening. Like today, web as a platform is damn near getting close. I mean, let's argue it's 15 years old, 16 years old. Mobile as a platform, we could argue is 8 years old. You know, iPhone 2008, but it wasn't really a good computing platform, let's say, until 2012. Back then, everything was new. So it was interesting. Like back then, naivete was an advantage because you were confident that maybe you could build something, but it wasn't a disadvantage because there weren't like 12 things that happened before you that all died that you should really know a lot about. I think today, naivete is still an advantage because it convinces you to go do something that's very hard, startups. But where it's a disadvantage is that most of the students that I see doing startups have not bothered to look at anything that tried to address the problem they're solving that was created even 2 years ago, let alone 8 years ago or 15 years ago. And the problem is that like every good investor knows all of those companies. So you think you're pitching something unique, and I am hearing the same fucking pitch 25 times. And then when I ask, oh, well, you're doing this, what about this company? I get the blank face of like, well, or even worse answer, they're idiots. Which is like always fun. It's like, yes, I bet the way that the reality is that you're smart and all your competitors are idiots. I bet that's how it works. Like it's a very convenient world. Probably not true though, but very convenient. Whereas the best founders now, the best young founders, you know, take a week and really dig and get some context. And the even better ones will ping founders of companies that failed and employees at companies that have failed in their space, solving the problem they have. And so the really best founders, they start with a pitch that I feel like I've heard before, and then they teach me something. And then, because I haven't done the research, right? Like I haven't done the research. So then they teach me something and then I'm like, oh, fuck. And like whenever you can get me on my heels and I'm like, you're telling me something I haven't heard before or giving me a perspective I never got before. Now I'm like, okay, let's talk more. But what's tricky is that most young people don't have any access to people who've seen a lot of things. They don't work at colleges, right? Like they don't, like it's not like, and so, you know, you can get a lot of friendly support in a local community, but it's hard to get a lot of kind of access to experience. You have to go get that yourself.
Okay, that's great. I think there was 2 or 3 great lessons for our audience today, and we have a lot of founders here, mostly Columbia alumni, but we also invited other people from New York, especially, to join us today. And we sold out like 2 weeks earlier already, so we had to look at our Zoom limits. So those were great lessons, and you know, you had that early success with Twitch. Well, Justin TV became Twitch, and then you had an impressive exit. Why did you join YZ again with Social Cam? How did you find it?
It's interesting. I think at first I was on the fence about it because I had, I think, the common misconception that YC is a school. And like, if you graduate with a degree in political science from university, you don't go back 5 years later and get the same degree. And interesting, I sat down with Brian Chesky at Airbnb and I asked him what he would do if he were in my shoes. And he said to me something that I never forget, and I tell founders all the time. He said, YC is not a school, it's a toolbox. When you're young and experienced, you're just learning how to use the tools. And it's helpful. I mean, it's always better than not having a toolbox, right? But when you're more experienced, you use the tools better. And that convinced me. And when I went through YC, we did it better. I mean, you would hope we would do it better, and we did. You know, we raised money from better investors at higher prices. We grew faster. We got more out of it. And I would argue it was at least 2 times more helpful the second time we did it than the first. I think the other thing that we really cared about was that we had been doing our company for 5 years, and we were worried we were going to be slow.
Okay.
And the other analogy I really like is that imagine if you're a college runner and you get to practice with the Olympic team for a week. Like you're gonna do better. and we really wanted to be around extremely hungry people so that we can kind of remember that old pace. And that also happened. You know, we're in a batch of, at that time, that was 64 companies. And what it did was it helped us set the top speed for our company. And then we continued to operate that quickly thereafter.
Yeah. I hope I got the days right when I was doing a little bit of research here. Did you make an exit like right after YC with Social Cam, like soon after? How did that happen?
The exits were funny. So we started Justin TV in 2006. We launched, we launched both Twitch and Social Cam in 2011. I left Twitch in 2012 to do Social Cam and to do YC again. We sold Social Cam later in 2012, so that would have been August of 2012, for about $60 million. And then Twitch sold in 2014 for about $1 billion.
Yeah, nice. So, and this was back in the day, like you mentioned, third batch. Wow.
The first time I did it was the winter of 2007, and then the second time I did it was the winter of 2012. So I saw a pretty big difference in programs between those 2 dates.
Yeah. What's the biggest difference that you can see? Is there like one big difference that you pinpoint?
I'll say 2. There were 2 big differences. I would say one, investors had realized how valuable it was. And so, you know, when we raised our seed round for Justin TV, we raised it at a $3.5 million valuation. We raised our seed round for Social Cam, we raised it at a $20 million valuation. And part of that was me, but part of that was, and our progress and my co-founders, but part of that was just YC was much more well-known. And then I would say the second thing is that there were far more experienced founders in YC by then. Like if you think about it, when we first started, everyone was young and hadn't done anything. You know, if you fast forward 7 years, you know, we had companies that were a lot bigger that you could learn from. And so that trend has only continued, but that was very, very helpful. You know, it became a point where for almost anything you were doing, there was someone in the network who had done it before.
That makes sense. You can leverage your network in so many ways, especially you were the first ones there. Yeah, let's fast forward actually all the way today. How has the pandemic changed things, and is that something you're going to keep for the years to come, or?
You know, so YC is remote now.
Yeah.
How has it changed things? I think that there are a couple positives. One is that it's forced us to document everything. One of the things that companies in general are doing right now is they're going remote, is they're having to kind of change their culture. And we have this document in YC called the user manual. And it started out as this like text file on a random website that PG wrote, and is now a full wiki of everything you would ever want to know. It's basically like, it's passed down between person who runs the accelerator, and it's a kind of collective wisdom on everything. And just because we went through COVID and going remote, I think we more than 2x the amount of content in that wiki in the last 4 months. And so I love that because, you know, founders learn differently, and, you know, we'll tell it to them, but if they can read it as well, it's 10 times better. So that was a really big change in the positive. I think the second big change in the positive is we got to spend more time with founders. Not commuting, not forcing people to travel. We were able to do, I think the number was 1,200 more hours of office hours with companies this batch versus last batch. So that was a pretty, it was a 50% increase. I think the third thing was the batch during COVID got a lot of the scenesters away. We have this YC jargon, we call it scenesters. And those are the people who are more interested in kind of like the scene of a startup than actually making an impact, solving a problem, putting in the hard work. And what we've noticed at YC is ever since the Facebook movie, the kind of hype around startups has increased. And then one of the things that happened after the Facebook movie was that institutional investors started investing a lot more seed funds. And so a lot more money started to flow to earlier companies and younger founders. The combination of those two things basically drove a lot of people into startups who otherwise would have been doing law, banking, consulting, blah, 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 blah. But like those fields, medicine, like those fields, a lot of people do them because the people around them are doing them, not because they like them. And most of the people who go into those fields have this kind of come to Jesus moment where they realize, I never wanted to be a lawyer. I never wanted to be a banker. Like, I never wanted to be a doctor. You know, and all of my friends who went to those fields, you know, about 20% of them love it. And the other 80% are kind of like, well, I make it work. You know, I make it work. And back in the day for startups, and I don't want to say this too much because I think in the 90s it was a different scene, but in the kind of mid 2000s, you had to want to do startups. It was not cool. It was absolutely not cool. Now it's, I would argue, just as cool as those other things. And so it probably has the same ratio of people who really want to do it versus people who are doing it because it's cool. And so when COVID hit, I think it became a little less cool. Thank God. Because like, unlike banking, and law and medicine, the failure rate in startups is so high that like, I think people have this false sense of like startups as a kind of a career that's analogous to those other careers. But like what we tell YC founders is that, 95% of them are going to fail with no or very limited direct economic benefit. And only less than 2% of the people who apply to YC get in. So like, the vast majority of startups fail with negative economic consequences to the founders. Now, a lot of founders are able to turn that around and kind of parlay that into a job or, or experience that can be helpful to them later in life, and they can kind of extract value out of it. But this is not the same as like, 99.9% of people who go to law school do not fail to become a lawyer. Ditto with med school, and like, yeah, banking is brutal, but 99.9% of people don't get fired out of banking. So it's just a very different thing. And it was really nice to see people who are very serious about the problems they were solving, as opposed to about like, this is the cool thing to do. I think the disadvantage was there's kind of a bit of a Debbie Downer across the entire world right now. Right? Like there's a bit of a, people don't feel fulfilled. People don't feel like they have relationships that they normally have. They don't believe like they can live their lives like they normally do. Politics is not in a situation that most people are happy with. And so I think in general, kind of the macro world environment was impacting our founders. And that's something, unfortunately, we can't, that's impacting the world. We can't control that. But that was certainly felt.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I can relate to that. My background is in law. I need the startup circle though. It's sort of like, it's a mental health aspect. I need that culture.
Yeah.
I'm not going to even talk about the culture in law firms, but I need it now. I'm addicted. Anyway, can't go back. And by the way, for the attendees, like you might have a lot of questions about YC. You can actually start writing them already in the chat. We're going to pick them up later. I think Lily's going to ask them for Michael. But I have a couple of questions here that I think most of our audience would like to know about. So first thing I want to ask, I don't know if this is a quick question, but how important is the founding team in your selection process? How important is it?
It's pretty important. I think the founding team is the only constant.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
It's common to change your product. It's common for your problem to either change or expand. The team doesn't often change. It grows, but the founding team doesn't often change. And if it does, it's usually a sign of death.
Okay.
And I think this is actually pretty interesting because I think that the common culture around business is that product is everything. And that you can kind of cheat everything else as long as you have a quote unquote good product. And what one of the things that I kind of love is that founders at YC always want me to reduce a multivariable problem to a single variable. Does it matter if I have a technical co-founder, if I can just get my product out? Should I care more about growth or about retention? It's always like, hey, and I always love those questions because I'm like, fuck you both. Like, you're trying to win a game that almost everyone loses. The person you're competing against has growth and retention. How do you match up? The person you're competing against has a great team and a great product. How do you match up? And like in some of these other fields, it's like, it's okay to be good at some things and bad at other things, right? But like in our field, you kind of have to be extraordinary or you die.
Yep.
And so I almost always turn any kind of either or question into both, unless it's something stupid, like something you shouldn't be focusing at all on. But it's usually either this is very important in the very important bucket and you have to juggle all those balls, or this is not important at all, you can ignore it.
Okay.
On the founding team, what we typically see in applications are a couple very, very glaring mistakes. One is not having the ability to build the product on the team.
Okay.
I cannot tell you how many business co-founders with no tech who say they have an amazing product apply to YC every year. And you know, if it's a 2% chance of getting into YC on average, those people have like a 0.2% chance of getting into YC.
Yeah.
So like it happens, every batch it happens. But the single non-technical founders who get into YC bring so much fucking ammo to the table. It's crazy. Like, I'll give you an example. There was one single founder, MBA, non-technical, a woman from Toronto. Her name was Sahar. And she applied to YC right out of business school with an idea to make a hair care product for curly hair women. Only had an idea, nothing else, nothing done, no background in the space, other than she had curly hair. Rejected. One of the easier rejections we could do, take 30 seconds scanning the application. She applies again the next batch. She had found a chemist and worked with them to iterate a product that she was using and loved. She'd set up a Shopify store. She'd marketed her product on Facebook. She had found a little kind of rented out garage space she could use as like an impromptu warehouse. And she was selling $100,000 worth of hair care products a month.
Wow. Yep. Yeah.
Now I read that application, I think, I don't give a shit what we prefer, right? I'm not going to bet against Sahar. Fuck that. She's in. But like, if you're a single non-technical founder, you're competing against her. Like we get one of hers every batch. So like, you better bring the fucking fire. Like, you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt. Like, you better bring the fire. It's a lot easier to get in with a team that can build their own product. It's a lot easier to get in building software than anything else.
Yeah.
And the reason why is that it's a lot easier to succeed.
Nice.
And, you know, we don't want to give you a false pretense on how, like, it is so hard out there, right? Like, the press doesn't report on the companies that die every day. They only report on the companies that raise money every day. If they report on the companies that die every day, the number of death stories would far outnumber the number of funding stories.
Nice. I like that. And we actually, my wife happens to be like Afro-Caribbean. We talk about the curly hair products all the time. Nice margins, by the way.
Yeah.
And you know,
you
nobody's
should check out Lust Brands.
Yeah. We look at that space all the time. That's great. I love the story. So, and I think you kind of actually answered my question already. I was about to ask you about what was the top 3 qualities you look in a team. I think it was somewhere there between the lines.
Yeah. The ability to build the product, founders who've known each other, and either personally, professionally. We don't really like teams that have first met. And then I think the last bit is teams that are actually making progress.
Okay.
I think there's this kind of thing out there where like you come up with a deck and then you raise money and then you do your product.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. And like, I love those because it's like, great. No, thank you. Like we're in a software revolution that made the cost of building a product 10,000 times cheaper, almost free.
Yeah.
And so if you need money to create your product, you don't. And so if you think you do, what it really means is that you're not being resourceful.
Okay.
Or your team doesn't have the skills.
Yeah.
And either way, that doesn't put you in a high leverage position when you're fundraising. Now, people will fundraise with that.
Yeah.
But I almost argue that the people who do oftentimes learn the wrong lesson. Oftentimes, like, their reward center gets reoriented towards like pitching and deck work versus progress and customers and revenue. Okay. And so it's kind of like feeding someone candy. Like, it'll keep them alive in the short run, but it won't make them healthy in the long run.
Okay. I like that. And I think you, so team is something you look at a lot, traction as well. And I guess what the traction tells about the team as well, kind of. indirectly. Is there anything else that should be mentioned when founders apply?
Equity split is something that we look at a lot.
Okay.
We have all this kind of hidden jargon in YC. One is Scenester. The other is called a cager, which is a hacker in a cage. So
Okay.
we'll see applications where it's the business person who came up with the idea, who owns 95% of the company, and the developer that they recruited 3 months later, who owns 5% of the company. But it's the CTO and the co-founder. And I always love that because in our application thing, we have the ability to message the founders.
Yeah.
And so what I'll always do, I always do this. I always message the founders and just ask like, hey, how did you come up with the 95-5 equity split? And I always get the same dumbass answers. One, I started working on it first, which I love. It's like, yes, you did beat your co-founder by 3 months. In a 10 to 30-year journey, you started 3 months earlier. So I guess you deserve 20x more equity. That makes sense, right? Two, that's what my co-founder negotiated, which is extremely short-sighted, right? Equity is about maintaining motivation over a long period of time. Most people, when they negotiate, they don't have the context for, I should be doing this for the next 10 years. But as the CEO, you need to have that context for your team. Or three, and I love this one, we're not a tech company, we're a tech-enabled company. The software isn't that important, which I love because your competitor who finds software important will kill you. And we'll fund that one and we'll make sure that they kill you. Because, in a fight where it's 50-50, the team with the better software is going to win. And so like, those three arguments I love seeing. And, there are a lot of founders who actually respond well to that and give their technical co-founder more equity. To be honest, like YC has been a weird engine of giving software engineers more equity in their company. And it's actually improved the outcome of the companies. So that's always a fun one to see in the application. So no cagers. No Scenesters, no cagers. That's
okay. People have to remember that now. I like that. So before, I'm going to ask you one question before Lily can tell us if there's some questions there. And depending on how many questions are, like, I have some silly questions here. I can get back to. But let's see. Let's ask something first before I'm gonna look through here a little bit. There's something. I think you're gonna mention this. You, I guess, introduced Airbnb Founders to YC. Why did you like the Airbnb Founders? What was there?
What was exciting? What
did you like about them?
What was exciting and interesting about the Airbnb Founders was really primarily one thing, which is that in the face of not very much progress, they were still very enthusiastic. Think about the story of Airbnb. It started in the spring of 2008. It didn't kind of graduate from YC and raise the first real round of funding until the spring of 2009. And I worked with them pretty extensively from the spring 2008 through the fall of 2008, through all the kind of ups and downs. And what I loved was that every time I talked to them, they came back and they had done something. They had made progress, they had changed the site, they had done something. And even though they were constantly getting punched in the face, investors were telling them no, users were leaving, like they just kept at it. And so I didn't know it was going to be a great company. I didn't know the founders were great. I mean, I enjoyed talking to them. It wasn't like because I had some kind of vision for the future. It was more because so many people just talk and don't do shit. And like, it's just depressing to be around those people. And it was really invigorating to be around a small early team that just was trying everything, was doing shit. And to be honest, like, I think a lot of the startup game is once you've achieved some amount of success, you try to give back because people give back to you for no economic reason. And that's part of the culture. And it's weird because I've noticed this is kind of a different thing on where I grew up. Like the philanthropic culture and the kind of arts culture on the East Coast and in New York is very developed. When people want to kind of give back, they tend to do it there. Those things in San Francisco are not developed at all. The industry's tech. When people want to give back, they work with other founders. And it's very different because I think that, you know, there are a lot of industries in New York that are zero-sum games. Like if I win, you lose. And so you kind of have to be careful about working with people in your space. Whereas more often than not in the tech world, you're making the pie bigger.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like, you know, people helped us with time, with money and when they never needed to, when we didn't deserve it. And so I think that was the other thing that I was doing, is making me feel like, okay, I'm returning the favor to the community.
Okay. I like that. And before I let Lily ask some questions from you, from the audience, you may remember this quote better. You mentioned like this punch in the face and being gritty and resilient and all that.
Yeah.
I think Mike Tyson said that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yep.
Something like that, right?
Yep.
I like that one.
Yeah.
So there you go. These thoughts, Lily, I'll let you take over.
Sure. We do have 4 questions actually asked by the audience. Yeah. The first one from Ravi is asking, what if the problem the startup is trying to solve is notoriously difficult? I think you kind of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think that, like, let's be clear. I think it's great when people are trying to solve hard problems. I think that most founders are very bad at coming up with initial solutions, which is okay. And so the trap that I see founders do is they identify a hard problem. They take a first pass at their solution, which they fall in love with, but that solution requires money or something magical that they don't have. So then they think to themselves, okay, here's the problem. I have the solution. Let me go out and figure out how to build that solution, you know? And more often than not, the right play is to say, I should spec a solution that I can achieve right now, as opposed to spec a solution that I can't. And that my solution doesn't matter. My solution isn't special. And I hate when people ask, what's your startup idea? Because it puts the emphasis on the idea, which isn't the important part. The important part's the problem. And so you should be willing to just fucking give away your solution. Who cares? Like, you should be able to switch your solutions, change your solutions. Nobody matters. None of that matters. And, you know, it was really funny, actually. I was talking to some kids at Stanford yesterday, and it was 2 female founders, and the problem they were trying to solve was sexual violence in college campuses. And their idea was that basically a major kind of issue that kind of opens up the opportunity for this is people not knowing how much they're drinking. So they drink some punch, they don't know what's in it, or they drink too much inadvertently, or somebody slips something in their drink. And that's kind of a major spark for sexual violence on campus. And all of that made sense. And they had, you know, friends who had personal experience with it. They were college kids, so they understand the environment. Problem was well understood. The solution they came up with was, we're going to create a branded new type of alcohol drink that has like standardized portion sizes, and convince all college kids in America to buy that instead of buying, like, you know, instead of mixing whatever jungle juice. But we need to raise $1 million because it's expensive to create a physical CPG product. And I just was like, how the fuck did you come up with a solution that's impossible for you to do? When, like, there were infinite solutions that are possible, right? Like, I don't know if they're going to work, but, like, damn it, you really painted yourself in a hole of, like, I need $1 million to get started. And so I spent most of the time just talking to them about, like, are there any software solutions that anyone could build quickly? And, you know, we brainstormed a couple, and I think that they kind of realized, oh, wait, we have far more agency here. Instead of just writing pitch decks, and pitching investors, like we can do something if we take it on a software direction. We can't do anything if we need $1 million to start, other than pitch investors.
Nice. So be passionate about your problem, but don't get married with the solutions that.
Yeah, and aggressive problems are great, but aggressive problems don't need expensive initial solutions.
Nice.
That's
Nice.
definitely a great advice. I think the second question is more touching on when you say progress. So what the question is, what is the criteria for companies that are pre-revenue for you to select?
Yeah, I don't know what that means. Like, what are the criteria for getting into Colombia? Can you all got in, can you clearly list them? Not really, right?
Yeah.
Like, you need good SAT scores, you need good grades, you need good extracurriculars. Like what does good mean? I think that that's a very, very hard question to answer in any kind of specificity, right? At the highest level, you need a technically talented team that is making progress on a problem that they really care about and that's using software to do it. That's the typical. That's the 90%. There are always exceptions, though.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And like, let's be clear. One easy thing to do is not be a pre-product startup. Right? I mean, like it's pretty easy in this day and age to build a website. And then bang, you're a post-product startup. That's a progress.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
The third one from James is, what is the most common mistake made when people are applying for YC?
That's a really easy one. They're using us as a filter as to whether they should be working on this problem at all. Oh, we wanted to, we think you pick good startup ideas. So we're going to apply with an idea. And if the idea gets into YC, we'll work on it. Which is like hilarious, because if you just look, most YC companies die. If like you're using us to pick your idea, we have a ridiculously high failure rate, like incredibly high failure rate. I don't know any investor that has a good failure rate on picking ideas. So yeah, don't outsource the product or the problem you're working on to us.
Yeah. Really quick follow-up question on that. Has this ever happened that there's a really talented team that comes to you, but they're not sure what they're going to build or what the idea that they're going to execute? And
we stopped funding companies that apply with no idea.
Okay.
Because it turned out that those teams weren't able to actually ever decide an idea.
Okay.
Now we do have companies every batch that pivot to a new idea, which is totally fine. But like, we need to see some evidence that you're willing to actually commit to something and make progress on it. There are a lot of people out there. God, there are actually a lot of young people out there who are like, I need to find the perfect idea to do a startup. And so I'm just going to be a scene stirrer in the startup scene and shit on other people's ideas and then like not do anything because like I haven't found the cool idea that like VC Twitter will love. Like I haven't found the Clubhouse or some bullshit like that. And like, I don't like those people. Like I actively tell people to just avoid those kinds of people. Like they make the startup community worse, not better.
Okay. Let's stop doing that. That's good. I like that. Very good.
I guess the next one is from Nick. He's asking for startups that will worry about educational gap for their users, building up educational content on the website or platform seems like a good solution. How would you recommend we communicate necessary information to investors when startup has much less time to guide investors in a potentially new industry or new market?
That doesn't even make sense as a question. That's like two different questions. It sounded like it started with, when a user comes to our website, I have to teach them how to use my product. And it ended with, how do I talk to investors about a problem they don't understand? So let's treat them as two different questions. One, for the first, at least 10, but often 100 users, you should be manually onboarding them. Like on Zoom, on the phone. So it doesn't matter if your website sucks, because like you're literally there helping them and telling them where to click. So that solves that problem. You don't have to build all this special educational content. On the second front, instead of picking investors based on brand or who you know, you should probably try to pick investors based on their demonstrated interest in the problem area that you're in. And then you will have to educate them less. I think that like a lot of times I get emails from founders who are just kind of like, can you just introduce me to angels, like any angels you know, or any seed funds you know? And like they treat this group of people like they're commoditized. Like it's like, yes, if I buy a yellow onion in New York, it's the same yellow onion that we buy in California. But that's not the case for investors. Investors have interests. And I always like to think about the founder who's beating you. That's always been motivating to me, right? The founder who's beating you is taking an extra minute to research investors, find what they're interested in, and reaching out to investors who are interested in the same shit that they're doing. That founder's out there right now. How do you match up?
Yeah, you go beat them. Yeah.
And by the way, I don't want to belittle people who are making these mistakes. Many of these mistakes I made, and I just had to learn by getting punched in the face. And so, you know, I'm just trying to, if you can just make half as many mistakes as I made, you're going to be better off.
Oh yeah, that sounds, I wish yeah. And I'm kind of person, I have to do all my own mistakes. Somebody told me something 10 times and then I do the mistake myself. Oh, now I understand why they told me not to do that. There we go. I know, I feel it. Do we have something else there, Lily?
No, we actually do have a lot more. The next one is, will YC consider companies in business for years and post revenue?
Yes. So that's a great question. There are a lot of assumptions about YC that people don't read our website or look at our companies list. And so they kind of like, they don't research, but they assume, or even worse, they ask non-educated people. And so I just put into chat the public list of companies. You can basically see everyone. And if you look at, for example, the recent batch, you can see companies that had started before, companies that just started then. You know, we've had a company that had raised $40 million before they did YC. We've had company do YC with a $40 million run rate before they did YC. And we had companies who started working on their product 2 weeks before they applied to YC. Like I said, it's a toolbox, and you know, the dad who grew up in the city and doesn't know how to use tools can still use a hammer, and the carpenter who can build a house with a hammer can also use a hammer. And they both can find the hammer useful.
I'm a hammer guy.
Thank you, Michael. And the next one is, how does industry impact your decision making? Like when you're picking companies.
How does what? Industry?
Yes.
Not at all.
Okay.
Yeah. If you look at that site too, you'll see, I mean, I challenge you to find an industry category that we haven't made an investment in.
Good. The next one is, given the global pandemic response, how do you determine whether a company is engaging in earnest or just providing lip service?
I don't know what that means. Like when they're in the batch, when they're applying, I'm not sure what that means. Maybe try to ask that a different way.
Bullshit detector, I guess. I don't know, something like that.
All right, we can probably move on to the next one. What advice would you give to someone who's trying to explain a B2B solution in professions where an investor may not, understand the industry, such as law or accounting?
I already answered that. Like investors invest in all different areas. Go find the people who seed invested in law tech or accounting tech companies. They exist. I mean, hell, like I was on the board of Atrium for like 2 years. I know fuck tons about law tech. Like, it's not like your job as a founder is not to convert every investor you talk to. And it's actually something that is more generally applicable that I really want to speak to. I think that there's a false assumption about what sales or pitching is. I think that people think of it as like debate or argument. I should be able to, if I'm right, I should be able to debate anyone and convince them of my viewpoint. Sales is nothing like that. In sales or in pitching, there's what we call qualifying your lead, right? Basically, you want to look at all the potential people you could talk to as a salesperson, and you want to sort them by likelihood to close. And then you want to talk to the people who are more likely to close first. Same thing with investors. And so the world of investors is so wide, you shouldn't be thinking, oh, I know 10 investors, I have to figure out how to close all 10 of them, even if they know nothing about my space. You should be thinking like, if I'm resourceful, I should be able to get introductions to investors who do know something about my space.
Yeah, I like that. I'm really bad at like sales. Only way I can do sales is that I bring value to somebody. That's the only way. If I figure that out, that's the only way I can sell. I can't do anything else. I like that.
It's probably the most solid way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is, when should a startup pivot, and to what degree? I guess it's also a broad question.
Yeah, so I'll answer this quickly. I think that there's two flavors of failure here. Another YC jargon term is pivotitis. It's when a founder believes that startups are supposed to grow explosively quickly or else they're bad ideas. And so they launch something, it doesn't grow explosively, and then they switch, and then they switch, and then they switch, and then they switch. Which just kind of goes to show that like they have no passion of the problem they're solving because they're willing to switch it so rapidly. You know, if that's your game, I probably would do finance and not, because like in finance, you don't really care what stocks you invest in or what deals you do, you just want to make money. So that's a failure mode. I see the failure mode on the other side, which is like, oh, I should be willing to sacrifice all of my savings, where I live, my entire future to make my startup work. And that's also bad. And so make sure you're not living on either of those extremes. Typically, when you're in the middle, we say one of two things. I like to talk about it like time. You should be willing to commit 2 years to solving a problem. Right? Our problems are hard to solve. And if you're not willing to commit 2 years to something, like, are you really into it? Damn, you committed 4 years to fucking college and you probably didn't learn very much. So you should commit 2 years. Another way of explaining it is like, you should commit as long as you can come up with new ideas.
Okay.
New angles, new ways of addressing the problem that you're solving. Different strokes for different folks.
2 years. It's very good.
The next one, I think this from author, sounds like they have a running small profitable software company. And the question is, what is the good frame to see if VC investments or / YC is appropriate for the business?
I think you should ask yourself, is this a large market? Is this a product with good margins? And is this a product where a multi-billion-dollar company can exist? If so, then I'd ask myself, do you want to build it? Because you don't have to. One of the most successful founders I've ever met is a guy who it was a YC alum, who his side business was a website that allowed people to search for domains. It's called Instant Domain Search. That business generates between $20,000 and $40,000 of cash every month to that person. I watched on Facebook all of the years that I was toiling and not making any money and on the verge of dying over and over and over again. I watched him work at Facebook because he wanted to, just for fun, retire, get married, have kids, travel the world. He's winning. That's winning. Like, you don't have to create $1 billion company to win. One of the great things about software is that like you can build an amazing lifestyle business that changes your life and your family's life forever.
Nice. Yeah. Okay, one more, Lily, and
You can probably do one more.
Great. Yeah.
What is the most exciting differentiator of YC compared to other accelerators?
I could come up with a few.
I mean, ours works. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think that founders are very susceptible to marketing and don't do research. And I think that if you do a little bit of research, you'll just see that the vast majority of successful companies that have done accelerators have done YC.
Mm-hmm.
I think that founders also search for an analogy when it comes to accelerators. They search for a school analogy. Oh, I'm doing fintech, so I should do a fintech accelerator. Or I'm a woman, so I should do a woman accelerator. And the analogy falls apart because I would argue that if you're a smart and motivated person and you go to any of the top 100 universities in America, you can get a great education. If you're motivated and you work hard. The difference between the top 100 accelerators is massive. The quality drops off like a rock. And so I would argue that when you're giving equity, it's one thing if you go to a program that you're not giving equity to, it's different. But if you're giving a sizable chunk of your company away and you're going to a program that doesn't have existing success, I would ask myself, why are you taking risk on their product? Your product is so risky, and doing an accelerator is not a requirement to building a successful company. Most of the products that you use today were not developed from accelerators. So why would you take a risk on someone else's product?
Yep.
Makes absolutely no sense. This is the world where like the only reason why you should be willing to give up 7% is because someone is because one, it's your only path, right? Like it was for us back in the day. It was our only path, right? But no one was going to give us money. And for a lot of people around the world, it's their only path. Or because excellence has been demonstrated over and over again.
Yeah,
so
I like that.
That's it.
And yeah, before we let you go, just one really quick question. Any tips on the timing of submitting your application to YC?
Yeah, one of the things that's not well known is we read applications year round. And so it's this kind of weird thing. I think there's like too much kind of myth and lore about the YC application process. What I would say is that like progress is valuable and you can create progress quickly. And so if you're in the process of creating progress and you're before the deadline, apply at the deadline. There's no advantage to applying earlier. If like you're making progress, things are going well, like apply the deadline. If you're after the deadline, it's fine. Airbnb was late application, not an issue.
Nice.
If you have to make a funding choice earlier, like you're considering a number of different options and you need to make a choice earlier about funding, apply early and like let us know and we'll read the application, and we typically can get back to you within a couple weeks.
Nice.
And so it's a very flexible process, but sometimes I see people applying early. Once again, using the college analogy, I think sometimes when you apply early to college, it's an advantage. And it's like, no, like I'd be thinking about what's my strongest application. Like it's about you and your company. It's not about optimizing our process. Like, what is your strongest application? And if like another month of progress makes your application look 100% better, like take an extra month. The result of that as well is that we'll typically even accept companies the day before the batch, which is pretty fun for them. So we do very late accepts. And then when people who apply during the batch, we do some early interviews for the following batch. So admissions runs year round.
Nice. Any last things you want to add here, or we covered most of it?
Yeah, I would just say this. And this goes back to the scenester point. Like, to the scenesters out there, because they're always there, if you can find a problem that you're really passionate about and you're brave enough to attack it, I've seen people who started as scenesters become amazing founders. To the founders out there who are often technical, who are turned off by startups because of the scenesters, understand that like you control who you hang out with.
Yeah.
And there exists a large community of people who are technical and smart and motivated, and you can hang out with them.
Okay, pick the right friend. Case founders. That's.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
You're good.